Chapter 9. The Homeless. I'm Michael. Where do you live, Ruby? Here and there. The building had been a department store many years ago. Now the sign on it said Samaritan House.
It's a private shelter,
Mordecai said.
90 beds. The food's okay. Some churches in Arlington got together and they pay for everything. We've been coming here for 6 years.
Inside, we used a bedroom as an office.
This is a good office,
Mordecai said.
We can be private here.
What about a bathroom? I asked.
They're in the back. You don't get your own bathroom in a shelter.
I could hear radios. People were getting up. It was Monday morning, and they had jobs to go to. Is it easy to get a room here? I asked Mordecai, although I already knew the answer.
Nearly impossible. There's a long waiting list.
How long do they stay?
Maybe 3 months. This is one of the nicer shelters, so they're safe here. After 3 months, the shelter tries to find them an apartment.
And our clients all come from shelters? I asked.
Half come from the shelters,
Mordecai said.
The other half from the streets.
We take anybody?
Anybody who's homeless. The people here at this shelter have jobs, but they don't earn enough to pay rent for an apartment. So, when they get one, they lose it again. One missed paycheck, and they lose their homes.
My first client was called Waylene, age 27, 2 children, no husband. Her problem wasn't complicated. She had worked in a fast food restaurant. She started to tell us why she left her job, but Mordecai said that the reason didn't matter. She hadn't had her last 2 paychecks. Because she had no address, the restaurant had sent the checks to the wrong place. The checks had disappeared, and nobody at the restaurant cared.
Will you be here next week?
Mordecai asked. Waylene wasn't sure. Maybe here, maybe there. She was looking for a job. She might move in with someone or get her own apartment.
We'll get your money, and we'll have the checks sent to our office,
said Mordecai. He gave her the address of the 14th Street Law Center. She said thanks and left.
Call the fast food restaurant, Mordecai told me. Tell them you're Waylene's lawyer. Be nice at first. If they don't send the checks, stop being nice. If necessary, go there and get the checks yourself.
I wrote down everything Mordecai said, like it was complicated. Waylene's paychecks were for $210. My last client at Drake & Sweeney was trying to get $900 million. But I was happy enough when I got home at the end of the day. My new apartment now had some old chairs in it, and the TV was on a box. I smiled at my furniture. My mother had called. I listened to her voice on the answer phone. She and Dad wanted to visit me. That evening, I watched basketball on TV and had a few beers. At 11:30, I called Claire. We hadn't talked in 4 days. Why shouldn't we talk? We were actually still married. I thought maybe we could have dinner soon. The phone rang, and then a voice said, "Hello?" It was a man. I couldn't speak. I had been gone less than a week, and Claire had a man in the apartment at 11:30? I almost put the phone down, but then I said, "I'd like to speak to Claire, please."
"Who's calling?"
"Michael, her husband."
"She's in the shower," he said.
He sounded pleased with himself. "Tell her I called," I said. I walked around the room until midnight. Then I went for a walk in the cold. Why did our marriage go wrong? Who was that guy? Was he someone she had known for years and I didn't know about him? I told myself it didn't matter. We weren't divorcing because of other people. We were divorcing because of us. And if she was free to find another guy, then I was free to find someone too. Yeah, right. At 2 a.m., I was walking around DuPont Circle, stepping over people sleeping in the street. It was dangerous, but I didn't care. After a couple of hours, I went home and got some sleep. Then I wanted to work. I got to 14th Street before 8 that morning, ready to start. As I walked through the snow, making my way to the law center, I thought of my clients. By now, I had a few. There was Waylene and her paychecks. There was also Marvis. Like me, Marvis wanted a divorce. His wife was on drugs. She had taken everything he had, including their 2 children. Marvis wanted them back. "How long will a divorce take?" Marvis had asked me. 6 months, I told him. Marvis was clean, he didn't drink, and he was looking for work. I enjoyed the half hour I spent with him, and I wanted to help him. Another client was a 58-year-old woman. Her husband was dead, and the government was sending her money to the wrong place. I could get all her money back and then get it sent to the right place. A lot of my clients had problems like that. They were just not getting money, often from the government, that should be theirs. When I reached the law center, a little woman was sitting against our door. The office was still locked. It was below freezing in the streets. When she saw me, she jumped to her feet and said, "Good morning. Are you a lawyer?" "Yes, I am." "For people like me?" She looked like she was homeless. "Sure. Come in." I opened the door. It was colder inside than outside. I made some coffee and found some old cookies. I offered them to her, and she quickly ate one. "What's your name?" I asked. We were sitting in the front office next to Sophia's desk, waiting for the coffee and for the office to get a little warmer. "Ruby," she said. "I'm Michael. Where do you live, Ruby?" "Here and there." She was between 30 and 40, dressed in a lot of old clothes. She was very thin. "Tell me," I said. "I need to know. Do you live in a shelter?" "Not now," she said. "I live in a car. I sleep in the back." I poured 2 large paper cups full of coffee, and we went into my office. "What can I do for you?" I asked. With both hands on the coffee cup to keep warm, and without looking at me, she told me her story. She and her son Terrence lived in a small apartment. When Terrence was about 10, she went to prison for 4 months for selling drugs. Terrence lived with her sister those 4 months, but when Ruby came out of prison, they had lost the apartment. She and Terrence slept in cars, warehouses, and under bridges in warm weather. When it was cold, they went to the shelters. She couldn't stop taking drugs. A few years back, she had worked for a couple called Rowlands. Their children were grown and away from home. Ruby offered to pay Mr. and Mrs. Rowlands $50 a month if Terrence could stay with them. The Rowlands weren't sure at first, but in the end they agreed. Terrence had a small bedroom at the Rowlands' house. He started to get good grades at school. The Rowlands were good people. Ruby was allowed to visit Terrence for an hour each night. With great difficulty, she managed to pay each month as agreed. She was pleased with herself. Until she went to prison again. She couldn't stop taking drugs. And now Terrence didn't want to talk to her. He wanted to join the army. Mr. Rowlands was an army man. One night, Ruby took some drugs and then went to the Rowlands' house. She screamed and shouted, and the Rowlands and Terence threw her out. The next day, the Rowlands started a lawsuit. They wanted Terence to become their son. Ruby wasn't allowed to visit him until she stopped taking drugs. "I want to see my son," she said. "I miss him so bad." "You won't see Terence until you stop the drugs," I said, trying to say it nicely. I had to get her onto a drugs program. Sophia knew where Ruby should go. Sophia knew everything and everybody. She made a phone call, and then Ruby and I were on our way to Naomi's Women's Center on 10th Street. It opened at 7, closed at 4, and between those hours helped women with a drug problem. I spoke with Megan, the young woman in charge of Naomi's. We had a long talk. It was the first long talk I had had with anyone in a long time. Chapter 10. Chicago. "There's going to be a lawsuit, Hector," I said, "against Drake and Sweeney. You can't hide from that." I was sleeping on the floor at the apartment. I liked it down there, and it helped me understand my new clients. In the middle of the night, the phone rang. It was Claire. The police were in her apartment, wanting to search it for the file. I looked at my watch. It was 1 a.m. "I'll be right there." The door was open, and I ran in. There were 3 policemen in there, and I shouted at the nearest one, "I'm Michael Brock. Who are you?" "Lieutenant Gasco," said the policeman, not very nicely. "Claire," I shouted, "get the video camera. There's going to be a lawsuit, Lieutenant Gasco." Lieutenant Gasco showed me a document. "It's signed by a judge," he said, "and it says we can search for the file." But he knew I was a lawyer, and he didn't look very happy. "The file's not here because I don't live here," I said. "Now give me your names and then go." Claire was filming it all with the video camera. Their document was fine, and I knew that. But the 3 policemen gave me their names and then left. "Can they come back?" asked Claire. "No." "That's good." "Did you tell them where I live?" I asked her. "Michael, I don't know where you live. You just gave me a phone number." I said goodnight without touching or kissing her. I knew that was what she wanted. I thought hard. Now I had to tell Mordecai everything. It was possible that the police would come to the law center looking for the file. Next morning, I tried to phone Hector Palma from the law center. His secretary said he had left the Washington office. I put the phone down. Now what? I stared at the ceiling. Mordecai came into my office. I started my story. "My wife and I aren't together. I moved out of our apartment." "I'm sorry," said Mordecai. What else could he say? "Don't be. Early this morning, the police tried to search the apartment where I used to live. They were looking for a file that I took when I left Drake and Sweeney." "What kind of file?" "The Devon Hardy and Lonte Burton file." "I'm listening." "I don't think that Devon Hardy and Lonte Burton and the others were squatters. I think they were tenants, and if they were tenants, the eviction was illegal." "It sure was. Can't evict tenants without warning. But do you know? Or are you guessing?" I told Mordecai the story of the River Oaks file. I told him that something, probably a note dated January 27th, was missing from the file. "And what do you think is in this note?" he asked. "I can't be sure, but I think it's a note from Hector Palma. I think he knew they were tenants, and he said that in the note. But River Oaks wanted them out quickly so they could start pulling the warehouse down. They wanted to start the new building for the post office in February. I think Hector Palma's note of January 27th was removed from the file so Drake and Sweeney could evict Devon Hardy and Lonte Burton and the others as squatters.
Good,
said Mordecai.
So, we start a lawsuit for the family of Lonte Burton and the other people who were evicted.
Yes, I said. That way, Hector Palma has to tell the judge what he knows.
I'll contact Lonte Burton's parents, Mordecai said. They would be our clients in the lawsuit.
Her parents are dead, but she has a grandmother.
Fine. She'll be our client. But first, we need to find Hector Palma.
I think Drake and Sweeney will keep him in the company. If he leaves the company, they lose control of him. But they want him out of Washington. I think he's working for Drake and Sweeney in another city. Probably a new job with more money.
Sophia!
Shouted Mordecai, loud enough to be heard on Capitol Hill.
Sophia! We're looking for someone.
Sophia came in with paper and a pencil. I know, she said. I heard. She turned to me. I can help. Tell me everything you know about this person. I told Sophia Hector Palma's name, address, and job. I described him and said he had a wife and 4 kids. Age? Maybe 30. How much did he get a month at Drake and Sweeney? As a legal assistant, $3,000. He has 4 kids, so 1 or more will be in school. He can't send kids to a private school on $35,000. We'll start with the schools, then the churches. She went back to her desk, and she was on the phone for an hour. Each time she said hello in English, asked for the person she wanted, and then the conversation was in Spanish. An hour later, she came back into my office. They moved to Chicago. Do you need an address? But how did you... Don't ask. A friend of a friend in their church. They moved to Chicago last weekend. I can get you an address, but it will take longer. I don't need an address. I've been to Drake and Sweeney's Chicago office a couple of times. 2 days later, I was there again, but I hadn't flown first class, as in the old days. I waited outside the Drake and Sweeney building from 7 in the morning while 106 lawyers, the 3rd highest number after Washington and New York, arrived for work. At 8:20, Hector Palma arrived, and I followed him into the building. He got off on floor number 51. There was a phone there. I phoned Mordecai and told him about my progress. Then I phoned Megan at Naomi's Women's Center. Ruby was still there, doing okay. Hector Palma wasn't going anywhere for the next 10 hours, so I had another long talk with Megan. There was a list of partners' names on each floor. I chose one. I have an appointment with Dick Healy, I said loudly as I passed the desk, and then I walked past the desk down the hall. Hector had his own office in Chicago. Hello, Hector, I said as I walked in. So, how's Chicago? What are you doing here? I sat on Hector's desk. There's going to be a lawsuit, Hector, I said, against Drake and Sweeney. You can't hide from that. I didn't feel as confident as I tried to sound. And who's starting this lawsuit? Lonte Burton's grandmother, and later the other people who were evicted, when we find them. Hector just looked at me. You remember Lonte, don't you, Hector? She was the young mother who fought with the policeman when you were evicting everyone. You felt bad about it because you knew she was a tenant, so you wrote that in a note dated January 27th, and you put that in the file. But Braden Chance took your note out again. That's why I'm here, Hector. I want a copy of that note." "Why would I have a copy?" "Because you're smart, Hector. You knew that Drake and Sweeney's evictions were illegal. You knew how important your note was. Maybe you even guessed Braden Chance would remove it." Hector thought about that. I guessed he wouldn't be happy hiding in Chicago. The evictions were wrong, and he knew it. He had tried to help me once before. "Meet me at 12 in front of the building," he said. He was there on time. "I have 4 children. Please protect me," he said as he gave me an envelope. I thanked him, got a taxi, and opened the envelope. The note was dated January 27th. It said that the tenants were paying $100 a month rent on the 15th of every month to a man called Johnny. There was even a copy of a receipt signed by Johnny saying that he had received $100 rent from Lonte Burton on January 15th. It couldn't be any clearer. They were tenants. The eviction was illegal. At Chicago O'Hare Airport, I faxed copies of the note and the receipt to Mordecai. Then I caught the next plane back to Washington. A taxi from the airport took me back to 14th Street, where Mordecai and Sophia weren't looking as happy as I had expected. Lieutenant Gasco was in the office, waiting for me. As he took me out to the police car, Sophia was phoning fast and talking fast, first in English, then in Spanish. But she and Mordecai couldn't stop Lieutenant Gasco taking me to Central Police Station like any other criminal. Drake and Sweeney said I had taken their file, and that was theft. Chapter 11. Megan. Her eyes held mine for a second, and I thought, no wedding ring on her finger. It was Friday afternoon. I knew Mordecai could get me out on bail, but some very bad things could happen to a good-looking white boy in prison over the weekend. In the police car to Central, I tried to think about all the great people who had spent some time in prison, like Martin Luther King. But then I thought of my parents. Their son in prison would be the end of their world. My friends already thought I had ruined my life. I didn't know what Claire would think, especially as she had a new man now. At Central, Gasco led me like a lost dog. They took everything I had in my pockets, and I signed for it. Then my photograph and fingerprints were taken. There were police everywhere, but only one other white face, a man who was very drunk. We were walking to the cells. I was scared. "Can I get bail?" I asked. "I think your lawyer's working on it," Gasco said. The cell door closed behind me. There were 5 other prisoners in the cell with me, all black, all much younger than me. I sat on the floor. In the cell opposite, I could see the drunk white guy and hear him shouting. 2 large black men had him in a corner of the cell. They were hitting his head. Minutes passed. One of the young guys in my cell walked over to me. This was the end. "Nice jacket," he said, touching my jacket with his foot as I sat on the floor. "Thanks," I said, trying to sound like I meant it. He was 18 or 19, thin, probably a gang member who had spent his life on the streets. "I could use a jacket like that," he said, giving me a kick with his foot. You shouldn't be a low-life street gang member then, I thought. "Would you like to borrow the jacket?" I asked. I wasn't going to fight back. If I did, the other 4 would help the first one. "What did you say?" I said, "Would you like to borrow?" The kick caught me in the head, and I shouted from the shock. "My friend said he could use a jacket like that," said one of the other 4. "A gift would be nice." I quickly took off my jacket and held it toward the young gang member who had kicked me. "Is this a gift?" he said, taking it. "It's whatever you want it to be." He kicked me again, hard in the head. "Is this a gift?" "Yes." "Thanks, man." I sat in a ball on the floor. My face hurt. The floor was getting cold. What would happen when I needed the toilet? "Nice shoes," said a voice above me. I gave them to him. Mordecai got me out on bail at 7 p.m. My bail was $10,000. My friends at Drake and Sweeney had told the newspapers about my stay in prison. Lawyer out on bail. Was it theft? I read the next day. They took a photo of me when I first joined Drake and Sweeney, and that was there too. They were trying to ruin my life. I wondered which client was paying for all the hours Rafter and Arthur Jacobs were spending on me. A client was definitely paying. A client paid for every hour of every lawyer's time. River Oaks, probably. I went in to work at 14th Street. Ruby was asleep in front of the door. "Why are you sleeping here?" I asked. She didn't answer. She was hungry. I unlocked the door, made coffee, and went to find the cookies. The phone rang. It was Megan. Ruby had left Naomi's. "Are you taking drugs again?" I asked Ruby. She didn't look at me. "No," she said. "Yes, you are. Don't lie to me, Ruby. I'm your friend and your lawyer, and I'll help you see Terrence. But I can't help if you lie to me. Now, will you go back to Naomi's?" "Yes." "Good. I'll take you." "Okay." She took another cookie, her fourth. On the way back to Naomi's, she said, "You were in prison." "How did you know?" "You hear stuff on the street." When we arrived, Megan took Ruby into the women's group and then asked me to stay for coffee. She threw a Washington Post to me. "Bad night, huh?" she said with a smile. There was my photo again. It wasn't too bad. "What's this?" she asked, pointing at my face. A guy in my cell wanted my shoes. He took them. She looked at my shoes. Old Nikes. "Those?" "Yes. Good shoes, aren't they?" "How long were you in there?" "A couple of hours. And I got my life together. I'm a new man now." She smiled again. A perfect smile. Her eyes held mine for a second, and I thought, no wedding ring on her finger. She was tall and a little too thin. Her hair was dark red and short and well cut. Her eyes were light brown, very big and round, and nice to look at. She was very attractive, and I wondered why I hadn't noticed it before. I told her about me. She told me about herself. Her father was in the church in Maryland. He liked baseball, and he loved Washington. As a teenager, Megan had decided to work with the poor. It was a job, but a job she liked. I told her the story of Mr. and how I had started working with the homeless. She was very interested and asked lots of questions. Then she asked me to come back later for lunch. If the sun was shining, we could eat outside. I liked that. I thought it was romantic. You can find love anywhere, even in a shelter for homeless women.